He was known as the Boss, and for decades he lived up to the nickname. George Steinbrenner, legendary owner of the New York Yankees, died Tuesday. Steinbrenner bought the Yankees for $10 million in 1973 and transformed the team into a sports empire worth well over $1 billion today. During his reign, the Yankees won 7 World Series titles, but Steinbrenner may best be known for his bombastic style and hair-trigger temper. He butted heads with employees, fellow owners, and even his own players. On Tuesday, some of his rivals shared fond memories of Steinbrenner.
He wasn't as tough as people, made him out to be. Everybody talks about the phone calls that George would make in the dugout or to you. I have probably called him more times than he called me.
We went through some bad times, everybody else did, but he was a wonderful man.
I have a great relationship with the boss. I've known him since I was 18 years old, and we obviously there's a respect factor because he's the owner, and I work for him, but we were more friends than anything.
Joining us now with more is Ted Keith, baseball editor for SI.com. Ted, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
What will George Steinbrenner's legacy be?
I think it'll be 2 things. It'll be winning, and it'll be the way he transformed the game through free agency. Until he came around, baseball was a game where you could keep players for really as many years as you wanted. When free agency came, Steinbrenner said, I don't want anything to do with it, but then he quickly went out and started getting as many players as he could. That in turn drove up salaries around the game, it drove up ticket prices, it changed the very economics of the sport, and because he was located in New York, he had more money than anybody else. He used free agency to his advantage better than anybody else, and they wound up winning more World Series than anybody else.
How did he change the sport of baseball?
I think it was, well, his detractors would say he changed it for the worse because the game has never been the same financially that it was before. But his supporters would say that it was a change that needed to happen, that baseball was sort of dragged kicking and screaming into the modern age by allowing free agency, by things like revenue sharing that are a direct result of the money that he put into player salaries on the Yankees. So those areas, I think, are the things that he'll be remembered for the most.
What was it about him? I mean, he was notorious for butting heads, for firing people, for spending money, yet people still respected him. In the end, it almost seemed everybody came around. What was it about him?
I think part of it had to do with the fact that he did seem to soften a little bit as the years went on. For a number of years there weren't a lot of people that would find him charming in the least, and then by the end there were people who kind of came around and said, okay, he's not the tyrant that he once was. I think that he realized he had to give up a little bit of that control, but that was a very hard thing for him to do. And in fact, as successful as the Yankees were in the latter years of his tenure, there was about a 15-year chunk in there where they didn't win, they didn't go to the playoffs, and if they were known for anything, it was for dysfunction, for craziness, for ineptitude, really. And that was until the mid-1990s, really the hallmark of Steinbrenner's tenure of the Yankees. But we're not hearing that talked about a lot today because they were so good when he finally came back from the suspension for the second time in the late 1990s.
Yes, the pros far outweighed the cons, so to speak. And there was a magazine cover that made big headlines. Here it is now. He's dressed as Napoleon. Can you tell me what is the significance of this cover?
Well, obviously George Steinbrenner was a sizable figure in baseball, and he was very fond of the military. He was very fond of having a presence. Anyone who knew him would say that he had a huge ego. So when he was suspended from baseball in 1990, it looked like he was going to be banished for good. But a few years later, he was let back in, and Sports Illustrated decided that the best way to announce his return was to dress him up like a military figure riding back into the game. At the time, it wasn't intended to say he's saving baseball or he's saving the Yankees, but in a sense, that's what it wound up being, because the Yankees had gotten better in his time away. They developed their farm system, and when he came back and started spending again on free agents, it was kind of the missing piece to that puzzle, and we've seen what's happened to the Yankees since he came back.
Absolutely. And is there anybody who can touch him? Is there any manager out there today?
I don't think so. I don't think we'll ever see an owner like him again. For one thing, he sort of demanded total control over his team. Some owners aren't comfortable doing that. He was willing to insert himself into the game and the sport and the team the way a lot of owners aren't willing to do. He was willing to be wrong, and he was willing to make a lot of costly mistakes that owners aren't willing to make. And in the end, it paid off, but I think it's fair to say we won't see another owner with a tenure like he has that lasted as long as he did, or one that's really going to be as successful as his was. 7 championships in 37 years as an owner is tough to beat.
Okay, Ted, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.